The setting and story of the original Mary Skelter Nightmare and Mary Skelter 2 were built on several pillars, two of which stand out as the most important. The first is the heroes, who are a kind of reincarnation of characters from various fairy tales. These include Jack from the Tale of the Beanstalk, Atsu, who comes from the Japanese folktale The Grateful Crane, and Hamelin, whose image is based on the German folk song The Pied Piper of Hamelin. The second major face of the series is the living prison, a gigantic creature that suddenly appeared in place of a huge metropolis, driven only by its animal instincts. Inside the prison, everything is controlled by the Merkins, monsters who serve as wardens and executioners for all captured humans. The story once again brings us back to Jack, Alice, and the other Blood Maidens, who, after the ending of the original game, finally managed to escape their confinement. However, what awaited them on the surface was not a bright and colorful world, but a lifeless wasteland and mountains of corpses. The hostility of this new world was also demonstrated in full by the warrior group known as the Pink Massacre, who attacked and killed anyone they came across without warning. They were saved from such a fate by the severely wounded Hikari, who created numerous portals that scattered all the surviving humans across new, no less dangerous prisons. Will they be able to survive these even harsher conditions on their own and put an end to this nightmare once and for all? When starting Mary Skelter Finale, one must clearly understand that the game is called the final installment of the series for a reason. The original duology contained an enormous amount of information that the developers simply could not present again in the trilogy's conclusion. For players unfamiliar with the series lore, the beginning of Finale will feel abrupt and difficult. The game introduces several dozen characters all at once, whose conversations only raise more questions. Who are Jack and Clara? What exactly is the Liberated District? And finally, why is Atsu so fascinated with the Little Mermaid? The developers understood that the game would not be able to properly answer all existing questions and therefore added a Before Story section to the menu, containing every cutscene and conversation from the original games. The premise involving multiple separated heroes became one of the central themes of the trilogy's conclusion, reflected not only in the story but also in its game design. The game itself is a classic dungeon crawler with one major distinction: the player now controls several groups of heroes. You will constantly have to switch between them, as the levers for opening doors are always located in another party's territory. From a gameplay perspective, the multi-layered structure that characterized the original games has been carried over to Finale almost unchanged, which is more of a strength than a weakness. As befits the genre, the dungeons are packed with traps, hidden locations, bonuses, and treasure chests. The immortal nightmares, at least until a certain point, have also returned, particularly powerful monsters that patrol the prison floors. You can escape them simply by leaving their field of vision, with the caveat that these creatures are always visible and move around the map in real time. The turn-based battles have also remained unchanged, with considerable emphasis placed on blood and corruption. During combat, blood from monsters splashes onto the heroines, and when the corresponding gauge is filled, they enter massacre mode, which increases their damage and grants access to unique skills. However, if the blood has already been corrupted, the heroines enter a berserk state, becoming uncontrollable killing machines capable of even destroying their own allies. The only salvation is to purify the maiden with the blood youth or have one of the heroines lick the tainted blood away, receiving a small buff in return. The newly introduced curse comes in the form of insects, which randomly block access to basic functions and various abilities. The only way to get rid of them is simple but not always feasible: you need to splash the heroine with the blood of a Merkin or nightmare. But what do you do if the afflicted character has her attack function blocked? The game periodically presents such dilemmas, forcing players to find their own solutions within its well-designed mechanics. The developers also took care of players who might find these mechanics too easy and straightforward. The living prison earned its name for a reason: it experiences hunger, lust, and sleep. These desires are satisfied by defeating monsters, finding hearts, and traversing the dungeons. Filling the corresponding gauges activates a roulette wheel with random bonuses that can provide a slight advantage to the party. The new prison control system simply increases the chances of obtaining the effects the player wants. Another new feature is the prison trials, which increase the game's difficulty by reducing the party's stats or disabling certain functions, such as saving or using the minimap. Each trial also comes with a positive side. For example, increasing the strength of Merkins by 65% grants a 40% experience bonus, while lowering the character's luck inevitably raises the chance of obtaining items. The progression system adds even more variety to the gameplay. Players can change the classes of all controllable heroines, finely tune their skills, upgrade and replace equipment, and perform blood transfusions that grant special buffs and abilities. However, character progression also becomes a stumbling block. As we remember, we command several parties that are initially radically different in terms of composition and abilities. This changes once class changing becomes available, somewhat blurring the distinctions between characters. Eventually, this leads to all parties adopting roughly the same structure, similar skills, classes, and combat styles, which does little to alleviate the monotonous gameplay that has long been a hallmark of dungeon crawlers. The developers also generously included the visual novels Love Prison Tower Mary Skelter and Love Prison Tower Mary Skelter. True End, which were previously available only to players who pre-ordered the Japanese versions of Mary Skelter 2 and Mary Skelter Finale, respectively. The first tells the story of everyday life at the Supreme Blood High School, beside which stands a terrifying prison tower. Rumors have spread among the students that if a couple confesses their love at the foot of the tower, they will be bound together forever. Jack must therefore choose the girl with whom he will climb the tower. True End, on the other hand, serves as the canonically fanservice-heavy conclusion to the Mary Skelter series. Before completing the original game, it functions merely as a dating simulator in which Jack invites one of the Blood Maidens on a beach date. The technical side of the project also deserves attention, as this is one of those rare cases where a game performs excellently in both docked and handheld modes. There are no noticeable frame rate drops, nor are there any critical bugs capable of breaking the experience. However, a comparison with gameplay footage from the Sony PlayStation 4 version makes it obvious that the Nintendo Switch version was slightly simplified visually. This is evident in a certain degree of blurriness and a lower amount of environmental detail. It is also worth mentioning the less than ideal assignment of the dialogue skip function to the highly sensitive L trigger. This issue arises only in handheld mode, where the player's grip naturally rests near the trigger. When using the dock and a Pro controller, the problem disappears. Fortunately, the game includes a text log that records all recent conversations. Mary Skelter Finale can undoubtedly be called one of the best representatives of the dungeon crawler genre. The developers at Compile Heart managed not only to maintain the high standards set by the original duology but also to organically weave a multitude of new elements into the gameplay, adding even more variety. For all fans of the genre, the game is an absolute must-play, with the important caveat that knowledge of the previous game's stories is essential. Otherwise, players will have to spend several hours familiarizing themselves with the events that preceded this installment. I give Mary Skelter Finale as 9 out of 10.